There are 315 individual parts in a 1955 Patek Philippe perpetual calendar, and I know them all by heart. William, the man who stole it from me 5 years ago, only ever knew one thing about it: its price. He saw a trophy, a number on an auction block that would make other rich men jealous. But I saw my late wife's last gift, a mechanical universe of gears and springs ticking in perfect, beautiful harmony. A harmony he shattered, and that I was about to conduct into a symphony of ruin. My name is Samuel, and for the better part of 2 decades, I've been a horologist, a watchmaker. It's a quiet life, one lived under the focused glow of a magnifier, with the scent of fine oils and old metal hanging in the air. My shop, Timeless Pieces, was my sanctuary after Sarah passed. She was the one who bought me the Patek just a month before the accident. She'd saved for years, pooling her salary as a nurse with a small inheritance. "A master needs a masterpiece," she'd said, her eyes sparkling more than the polished gold case. That watch wasn't just a timepiece, it was the keeper of my most cherished memories, a tangible piece of the life we were supposed to have. It was a reference 2497, a model so rare, with its sweep center seconds and moon phase complication, that seeing one outside a museum was a once-in-a-lifetime event. It was, in a word, perfect. And then William walked into my life. He was the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor, impeccably tailored suits, a voice dripping with condescending charm, and the predatory stillness of a shark that knows it's the biggest thing in the water. He was a collector, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and disgust in horological circles. He didn't collect, he conquered. He came to my shop under the guise of wanting a custom piece, a consultation. He spent an hour feigning interest in my craft, asking all the right questions, making me feel seen. He spotted the Patek on my wrist. It was a rookie mistake wearing it to the shop, but it felt like having a piece of Sarah with me. His eyes latched onto it. The appraisal was casual, a simple "what a magnificent piece, may I?" I let him hold it. Another mistake. He offered to buy it on the spot, a number with so many zeros it made my head spin. I politely refused, explaining its sentimental value. He smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything has a price, my friend," he said. A week later, he returned with a different proposition. He claimed to have a contact who could trace the watch's full provenance, its complete history, which was something I'd always been curious about. He said it could significantly increase its insured value. He just needed to borrow it for a few days to have his expert in Geneva run the serial numbers against their private archives. He was so convincing. He left a deposit, a check for an amount that could have paid my shop's rent for a year, and drew up a temporary contract on his lawyer's letterhead. It all looked so official. I was a watchmaker, not a businessman. I was blinded by the promise of uncovering the secret history of Sarah's gift. I handed it over. The check bounced. The contract was a forgery. The address he gave was a vacant lot. William and my watch vanished. The police report went nowhere. It was a civil matter, they said, a deal gone bad. The devastation was absolute. It wasn't just the financial loss, which was crippling. It was the violation. He had used my passion, my art, against me. He'd stolen the last piece of my wife I had left. The next few years were a blur of grief and struggle. I almost lost the shop. I worked myself to the bone, taking on every cheap repair and battery change that came my way. I built my business back up, piece by piece, tick by tick. I rebranded, changing the shop's name to the Horologist's Anvil, and moved to a quieter, more upscale part of the city. My reputation for meticulous work with vintage pieces grew slowly but surely, attracting a clientele that appreciated true craftsmanship. I never spoke of the Partek. The shame was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The memory of William's smirk was a ghost that haunted my workbench late at night. Then, 5 years to the day after the theft, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a personal assistant at Harrington Acquisitions, a corporate-sounding name that meant nothing to me. The email was concise: Mr. William Harrington required the services of a master horologist for the authentication and servicing of a rare vintage timepiece ahead of a major auction at Christie's. They were referred to me by a mutual acquaintance in the industry. They needed someone with unimpeachable discretion and skill. Attached was a single, high-resolution photo. My heart stopped. It was my watch. The Partek. My Sarah's watch. The world narrowed to the pixels on the screen, the familiar gleam of the 18-karat gold, the specific patina on the lugs. I knew better than my own reflection. He didn't even remember me. To him, I was just another faceless craftsman, a tool to be used. The rage that had been simmering for 5 years began to boil. An idea, cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, began to form in my mind. For a full 24 hours, I did nothing. I just stared at the email, my finger hovering over the delete key. Part of me screamed to throw it away, to not let that man back into my life in any capacity. He'd already taken enough. Letting this go was the sane, rational choice. But another part of me, a colder, sharper part that had been forged in the 5 years of quiet fury, saw something else. It saw an opportunity. A chance not for simple revenge, but for a justice so perfect, so poetic, it was a work of art in itself. William operated in a world of reputation and provenance. He didn't just buy objects, he bought their stories, their histories. That was his currency. And I realized I was in a unique position to bankrupt him. I replied to the assistant with professional detachment, confirming my availability and my standard rates for servicing and authenticating a piece of that caliber. The fees were exorbitant, a small, petty tax I levied for my own satisfaction. They were accepted without negotiation. A week later, a black car with tinted windows pulled up to my shop. A courier in a sharp suit, who looked more like a bodyguard, handed me a heavily insured, climate-controlled Pelican case. He didn't say a word, just had me sign a digital form on a tablet before disappearing as silently as he arrived. Alone in my shop, I placed the case on my workbench. My hands trembled as I undid the latches. There, nestled in the custom foam cutout, was the Partek. It was like seeing a ghost. For a moment, all the anger melted away, replaced by a profound, aching sense of loss. I picked it up. The weight was familiar, a perfect heft in my palm. I ran my thumb over the crystal, half expecting to feel Sarah's warmth still lingering on its surface. It was in pristine condition, of course. William would have kept it locked away in a vault, a showpiece to be gloated over, not worn. I took it to my bench, my loop swinging down into place over my eye. The examination began. Every screw, every jewel, every polished surface came under scrutiny. This was my ritual, my art. I knew this watch intimately. I knew the slight imperfection on the number 7 of the date sub-dial, a microscopic flaw from the original 1955 printing. I knew the specific pattern of the Geneva stripes on the movement's main bridge, as unique as a fingerprint. It was all there. It was authentic. My watch. As I worked, the plan began to crystallize. It couldn't be crude. Smashing it would be a crime against art. A simple refusal to authenticate would just lead him to another expert. No, the revenge had to be as intricate and hidden as the watch's own movement. It had to be a flaw that only I could introduce, and that only the highest level of scrutiny could detect. The kind of scrutiny a multi-million-dollar watch at a world-renowned auction house would undoubtedly face. The humiliation had to be public. The destruction of its value had to be instantaneous and absolute. My eyes fell upon the escapement. The beating heart of the watch. It's the mechanism that controls the release of energy from the mainspring, the tiny collection of parts that creates the steady, rhythmic tick-tock. Specifically, I focused on the escape wheel. It's a tiny, intricate gear with uniquely shaped teeth. In a Partek of this vintage, it was a masterpiece of microengineering, finished to tolerances that were almost unbelievable for the era. The plan was audacious. I would manufacture a new escape wheel, a perfect replica, identical in every visible dimension and material composition. It would be a flawless forgery, so perfect that the watch would run without any perceptible difference in its timekeeping. But it would not be original. The difference would be microscopic, a subtle deviation in the finishing of the pallet jewel's contact surfaces, something invisible to the naked eye and undetectable by standard timing machines. But under the intense, spectrographic analysis that top-tier auction houses sometimes employ for pieces of this magnitude, the difference in the material's crystalline structure and tooling marks would be undeniable. It would be a Franken watch, a timepiece compromised with non-original parts. Its provenance would be instantly shattered. The story of the watch, its unbroken history, would be rendered worthless. And William, who had vouched for its perfect originality, would be exposed as either a fool or a fraud in front of the entire watch-collecting world. The risk was immense. If I was discovered, my career would be over. I would be a pariah, the watchmaker who deliberately vandalized a masterpiece. But the thought of William's face, of his reputation turning to ash on the auction block, was too powerful to resist. This wasn't just about a watch anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my wife's memory, from the man who had treated it all as a commodity. It was about using the very skill he sought to exploit as the weapon of his undoing. I took a deep breath, the scent of oil and metal filling my lungs. The decision was made. I would build the perfect floor. The next 2 weeks were a descent into a world of obsession. My shop became a hermitage, the closed sign a permanent fixture on the door. My life narrowed to the few square feet of my workbench, to a battle fought on a scale measured in microns. Creating a replica escape wheel for a 1955 Partek Philippe wasn't like ordering a part online. It was like forging a single perfect feather for an angel's wing. It required not just skill, but a kind of madness. First, I had to reverse engineer the original. Using a digital microscope and a set of custom-made calipers, I spent 3 days meticulously measuring every aspect of the genuine escape wheel. The diameter, the tooth profile, the arbor thickness, I mapped it all, creating a 3D model on my computer with a precision of 1/1000th of a millimeter. This was the easy part. The real challenge was the material. Partek in the 1950s used a specific steel alloy for their escapements, hardened and tempered in a way that gave it unique properties of durability and stability. Modern alloys were close, but not identical. Sourcing the right material was a journey in itself. I ended up finding a small, specialty foundry in Germany that still produced small batches of period-correct alloys for restoration projects. I told them it was for a museum piece, a white lie that felt insignificant compared to the larger deception I was planning. I ordered a small billet, paying a fortune for it, enough to make a dozen escape wheels, just in case. Then came the machining. My workshop had a high-precision CNC mill, but it was useless for this. The tooling marks would be all wrong, a dead giveaway to an expert. This had to be done the old way. I fired up my watchmaker's lathe, a vintage Swiss machine that I had restored myself. It was an extension of my own hands. For days, the only sounds were the soft whir of the lathe and the faint scrape of metal on metal as I painstakingly cut the basic shape of the wheel. Every few minutes, I'd stop, check the dimensions under the microscope, and continue. My diet consisted of black coffee and protein bars. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The most critical step was cutting the 15 teeth. Each tooth had a complex, club-like shape designed for the most efficient transfer of energy to the palette fork. Using a hand-cranked indexing plate and a custom ground cutter no bigger than a pinhead, I cut each tooth one by one. It was agonizingly slow. One slip, one moment of lost concentration, and the entire piece would be ruined. My back ached, my eyes burned from staring through the loop, but I was fueled by a cold, steady fire. With each perfectly formed tooth, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. I was creating the instrument of William's downfall. The final, and most crucial, element of the forgery was the finishing. This was where the trap would be set. A genuine Partek escape wheel from that era would have its teeth polished to a mirror finish using boxwood and diamond paste. I replicated this process perfectly. The surfaces were flawless. The deception, however, was on the impulse faces of the pallets on the pallet fork, the tiny synthetic rubies that engage with the escape wheel's teeth. I replaced the original pallet jewels with my own replicas. To the naked eye, they were identical, but I used a slightly different, modern method of synthetic ruby creation, and I polished them with a modern lapping technique. The surface would be too perfect, lacking the almost imperceptible signature of the 1950s polishing methods. An expert, under extreme magnification, would see it. A materials analysis scan would scream that the jewels were not period correct. Finally, after nearly 200 hours of labor, it was done. I held the two escape wheels side by side on a piece of white paper. They were indistinguishable, twins. One, a work of art born from a century of Swiss genius. The other, a work of rage born from 5 years of pain. The reassembly was a sacred rite. I carefully removed the original escape wheel and its pallet fork, placing them in a small, sealed container. Then, with the steadiest hands I could muster, I installed my creation. I reassembled the movement, the familiar dance of gears and springs falling back into place. I gave the balance wheel a gentle nudge. It sprang to life. I held the watch to my ear. The sound was perfect, a crisp, steady heartbeat. Tick, tock, the sound of a flawless machine. The sound of a bomb, counting down. I spent the next 2 days running diagnostics. The watch kept perfect time. The power reserve was normal. The perpetual calendar function was flawless. My forgery was a success. I drafted the authentication documents, a masterpiece of professional prose. I detailed the watch's excellent condition, the originality of its parts, a lie that tasted like victory on my tongue, and its superb performance. I gave it a full bill of health, signing my business name at the bottom. My reputation was now the guarantee that would lure William into the trap. The day before the courier was scheduled to return, I packed everything up. The watch, gleaming and perfect, went back into its case. The fraudulent authentication papers were placed in a handsome leather folder. My original, genuine escape wheel and pallet fork I hid away in my personal safe. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place. Now, all I had to do was wait for the spring to uncoil. The week leading up to the auction was the longest of my life. I had delivered the watch back to William's courier, my face a mask of professional courtesy. Inside, my nerves were a tangled mess of anticipation and dread. I had set a terrible machine in motion, and I couldn't stop it now. I followed the pre-auction hype online. Christie's had dedicated a full page on their website to the Harrington Partek, Lot 247. They called it a time capsule, a flawlessly preserved example of mid-century horological genius. They used excerpts from my own authentication report to bolster its pedigree. William was quoted in a press release, his arrogant words praising the watch's unbroken chain of originality, a history he had personally verified. Every word of his was another turn of the screw. The night of the auction, I sat alone in my darkened workshop, a bottle of overpriced whiskey on the bench next to me. I had the auction's live stream playing on my laptop. The auction hall in New York was opulent, filled with the kind of people who treated million-dollar purchases like a casual Tuesday. When lot 247 came up, the auctioneer's voice was filled with reverence. A video played on a giant screen, showing the Partek in glorious, revolving detail, its movement ticking in hypnotic slow motion. The bidding started at $2 million. It jumped in increments of 100,000. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 million. 3.5. I saw William in the front row, a smug, satisfied look on his face as he watched the numbers climb. He was basking in the glow of his prize, the master collector proving his dominance once again. This was his moment. The bidding stalled at $4.2 million. The auctioneer raised his gavel, going once, going twice. And then it happened. A man in the third row, a well-known and respected horological expert from a rival auction house, held up his hand. "A point of order, Mr. Auctioneer," he said, his voice calm but carrying across the suddenly silent room. The camera zoomed in on him. "We had our team conduct a final, standard spectroscopic analysis of the movement's key components this afternoon. I'm afraid we have a serious concern regarding the originality of the escapement." A wave of murmurs rippled through the hall. William's smile froze on his face. He looked confused, then annoyed. The auctioneer, a consummate professional, looked flustered for the first time all night. "Could you elaborate, Mr. Dubois?" "Of course," Dubois said, standing up. "While the escape wheel is a masterful piece of work, our analysis shows that the palette jewels are of modern, 21st century synthetic origin. The polishing technique is also inconsistent with Patek Philippe's methods from the 1950s. He let the words hang in the air. "The escapement, while functional, is not original to the watch." The silence in the room was deafening. The words "not original" were a death sentence. A watch of this stature's value is almost entirely dependent on its perfect, untouched state. An unoriginal part, especially one as critical as the escapement, rendered it practically worthless to a serious collector. Its provenance was not just broken, it was annihilated. The camera panned to William. The color had drained from his face. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He was shaking his head, trying to speak, but no words came out. He was exposed. In a single moment, in front of all his peers, his rivals, and the world's wealthiest collectors, he was revealed as a fraud who had tried to pass off a compromised piece as perfect. His reputation, the very thing he valued above all else, was incinerated. The auctioneer, after a frantic, whispered consultation, banged his gavel. We are withdrawing lot 247 from the auction pending further investigation. The humiliation was complete. I leaned back in my chair and took a long, slow sip of whiskey. It burned, but it was a good burn. I felt no joy, no ecstatic thrill of victory. Just a profound, quiet sense of justice. It was a calm after a storm that had raged inside me for 5 years. He hadn't just been beaten, he'd been undone by his own arrogance and my craft. He had tried to buy a masterpiece, but he had never understood what made it one. He saw the price, but I knew its heart, and I had performed a heart transplant. The aftermath was exactly as I had planned. The watch world was consumed by the scandal. William Harrington became a laughingstock, his name synonymous with fakes and hubris. He launched a furious investigation, of course. His lawyers sent me a threatening letter. I replied calmly, stating that the watch had been in perfect working order when it left my shop, and my authentication was based on the standard industry examinations I had performed. I had run timing tests, not a full materials spectral analysis, which was not part of our agreed-upon services. They couldn't prove a thing. I was just the humble watchmaker who had serviced the piece. The man who had put his name on the line, who had guaranteed its authenticity to the world, was William. I never heard from him again. A few months later, I read that Harrington Acquisitions was being quietly dissolved. The king had been dethroned. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the small container from my safe. Inside, the original, genuine 1955 Patek Philippe escape wheel and palette fork sit, perfect and untouched. They are a reminder of what was lost, but also of what was reclaimed. I didn't get the watch back. I didn't get my wife back. But I got justice. And in the quiet ticking of the clocks in my workshop, that sounds a lot like peace. I upheld the integrity of a masterpiece by flowing it, and in doing so, I found a way to make my own world whole again. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.